Now, suppose you want to um, keep an eye on your BMI. If you're in the UK, you would likely use this service by NHS. So this is NHS BMI service. If you remember in our first video, we kind of let our AI agents run rampant, trying to create the service. So yeah, I mean, so here is how it works, right? So you say you're an adult. The first page, it kind of tells you some bits about the service, and then it gives you a Start Now button, which is fairly popular in UK sort of services. Um, so you do this on the first page, it is asking you to confirm that you're 18 and over. And if you're not, like it's asking you to go to the other service, which is specifically designed for children and teenagers. So I'm going to click this, and this is where here is how the GDS question pages um, work, right? So this is a very good example of question pages out in the wild. Um, you would like on the rest of the internet, you would kind of expect like so. What other things that you need for BMI, right? It's your height, it's your weight, uh, probably your ethnic background because the ranges are different for different ethnicities. Um, and you would probably, for the rest of the internet, like you'd probably see a form, right? Like where on the same page, you kind of put your height in, put your weight in, choose your ethnicity, and like it comes out with your BMI in the next page, right? But this is not how GovUK does it, right? So they kind of tend to use these question pages a lot, and there is a lot of good user research um, that points to the fact that this is indeed the best way to do this, right? So one question per page, and you ask one thing at a time, right? So this is saying centimeters. I don't know. So I'd be, I guess, 170, 5, and then it goes through the ethnic background. I guess I'm Asian British, and that's my BMI, yellow. Huh. Um, but this is how it works. So one question at a time, and you kind of take them through the pages, and you kind of show the result at the end, right? Like very popular pattern in sort of GovUK services. Another slightly more complicated example of this is the Equality Information Survey, which is part of the GovUK Design System website. So it's shown here. And the way this works is like, first of all, you ask for users' permission, right? Like you need to ask them, is it okay if I take you through the equality questions? And if they say yes, then you ask the rest of the questions. If they say no, you kind of skip um, to the end, right, of wherever you wanted to take them in the first place. So there's a permission aspect here, and then you ask them the date of birth. You ask them if they have any physical or mental condition, lasting or expected to last 12 months or more. And here is where it gets fun, right? So if they answer yes to this, then you ask them the follow-up question: do your conditions reduce your ability to carry out day-to-day activities? But if they answer no here, or prefer not to say, you do not you don't ask them the next question, right? Like you take them all the way to the ethnic group questions, and there's like there's some kind of control logic going on here. The first example being, can I ask you the equality questions? Yes, you go through this rest of the questions. No, right to the end, right? And the next bit is like, do you have a mental health condition? Yes. Then you ask the follow-up question. No, you skip the follow-up question, right? So there's like a bit of control logic here, and which is, I would say, when I was writing fast-gov-uk, um, this was the hardest bit to implement, right? Like I've seen patterns of how pages are done, how forms are done, right? Like every framework does it. But this, like the question pages, also called wizards, are so dominant, like they're so common in GovUK services that I thought like if I want to make a serious framework where I'm claiming that you can make gov.uk services using this, it needs to have a very solid implementation of this feature, like question pages or wizards. If it doesn't have it, there's no point, right? And so, yeah, so today, what we do is we would implement a shorter version of equality, it's a simplified version of equality survey, in which what I do is I take out a bunch of fields. Like I want to show you all the features, but without like kind of having to type or like, all of these. I think they're like about 16 pages. So try to keep this video short, but also give you sort of the highlights, like, like what are the features? How do you do this, right? And so I think that will be cool. I'll close this and I'll switch to my editor. So this is the application that we've been working on. So I'm going to kind of pop in here towards the end and start writing my wizard, right? So a wizard, we have a wizard decorator like we have a form decorator. So it's fast.wizard. A wizard you can define as like, if we call it equality. Just like forms, a wizard is nothing but a series of forms, right? So there's like, it's a series of forms, so it would take data argument just like forms, but it is a series, right? So this function kind of is returning is rendering a state of a wizard. It also needs to know which step we are on, right? Like, so if the wizard is a series of steps, and each step is like a question, in our case, a form under the hood. This function not only needs to know the data, which is because it's a form, but it also needs to know which step we're on. So for this, we kind of do like a step argument, right? So this is the extra bit, like that is not in forms but is in wizards, right? So yes, for the sake of keeping this video short, what I do is I copy the code from here. So this is a simplified equality wizard implementation. What I would do is that initially, remove this. What I do is initially I want to take you through this step by step. So please note how, like we talked about how pages and forms are declarative. Please note how declarative the code is here as well, right? Like we are describing what the wizard looks like, and not like the imperative bits of like how it's the state machine, how it works. So as a developer, I come here and say I want the wizard. It's called equality, and here are the series of questions like that, like that are in that wizard, right? And so we are covering 4 questions at this moment. So the first question is called permission. So the first question has a single field, which is a radio field, and the name of the field is permission. The label is, do you want to answer equality questions? The choices are yes or no, and here is the sort of detailed labels for these choices. We can say the CTA, like the button that's shown at the end of the form, should read continue, and that's fine. Now, the next question is also radio. So this is the health question, right? So the health question is like, do you have any physical or mental conditions? The choices are yes, no, or prefer not to say. And I'll come to this in a bit. So I'm going to comment this for now. And I'll talk more about this in a, it's coming. The next question is the follow-up to this question, right? So, I mean, if you have some physical or mental condition, like, does it affect you on a day-to-day basis, right? The choices are a lot, little, not at all, skip, stuff like that. And there is, again, this field that I would comment out, right? So It is required false, and I'm not entirely sure if that is how it should be, but let's run with it and we'll fix it later. So the next question is, what is your sex? Male, female, prefer not to say. But there's a fun little thing here, right? So this is like in this instance, in this particular question, it makes sense to show to ask two questions on the same page, right? So I'm asking, what is your sex? But I'm also asking, is the gender you identified with the same as your sex registered at birth, right? So that's like there are two questions, but I want to ask them on the same page because they're related and it makes sense. And I'm sure there's some user research on why this is the way it is, but it seems like it makes sense to do this, right? So two radios, and if I want to like do this, I can kind of chuck them in a field set, right? The reason I chuck them in a field set is then it allows me to kind of give a big heading. Like, so I'm grouping together fields. It allows me to give a big heading, sex and gender identity. And again, this funny field, right? Predicates. So I'm going to again comment this out because I want to come back and talk to you what this does. So in terms of backends, like this is very similar to forms. So we have a DB backend. We would like to store whatever the user submit. If it's valid, we'd like to store it in the database. And the rest of the two things, like we've done this for form, like hooking up like the data submitted with the form into the form object. But over here, we also have to hook up the step. And I'll talk to you about why we have to do this. But here is the code for your wizard, right? Like it reads pretty nicely, I think. And it's more or less describing how a wizard should look like and not like how it should work. And that's what being declarative means, right? So I'm gonna try and run it and see how that goes, right? So that should work. I can go my localhost, and it should be rendered somewhere here. I got some breakpoints hanging over from the last time. I'm going to get rid of them. Oh dear, because I got the font really big, massive font. So it's okay. I think I fixed this. Okay, so we are at the first question. Do you want to answer the equality questions? Now, so I've laid out the wizard so that there's no control flow logic right now, right? So you see the first question, it doesn't matter what you say to that. Like it will ask you the second question, the third question, the fourth question, like it will kind of go in series, and that's fine, right? Like we'd come back to the control flow bits after we've made sure that we can actually fill the form. So randomly, I'd say yes, but even if I say no, there is nothing stopping it. Like there's no control logic at this moment in time. So I say yes, it's fine. And it's a big point. Remove that. If I say yes, it's asking me, do you have a mental physical condition? I'd say prefer not to say. Um, Although I said prefer not to say, it still asks me the follow-up question. So that's because we haven't implemented any control flow logic here, right, at this moment in time. And we come back to it and we talk about it. And then you got your final question and it's done, right? Like it did something, it's hopefully saved something. And so the first thing we can do is we got the service DB still. So we can kind of go and check if the thing got saved. So to this, remove that, terminal here. I'm not used to this actually. So what do I do? Should I close it? Let's try closing it. And I'm going to move myself here so you can see this. So SQLite 3, open service.db, mode table, and select star from, I suppose, wizards. Let's see, maybe forms. And here is forms. So it saves it to the same table. Maybe we should change that. But maybe we shouldn't, right? Like a wizard is kind of just like a form, but it's just broken up across pages and there's some control flow in between. But otherwise, yeah, it is more or less a form, right? So here is the data that I submitted. Equality is the time, and here are my answers, right? So it does everything else. Like the reason I showed this is to kind of assure you that everything else um, works the same way as a form, right? So if you've seen my last video in which I did a deep dive on forms, a wizard is nothing but a form, right? Like it functions exactly like a form, but it's kind of broken up across pages. That's my sort of two bits here. Now, let's do something slightly more interesting, right? So most of the times when you want to break up forms across pages, the reason you're doing it is because you want to introduce some kind of control flow in to your user, right? Like how you go through the form. So in this case, on the first page, when you're asking, do you like, would you like to go through the equality survey? If the user answers no, you don't want to ask them any follow-up questions, right? And this is control flow, right? In a very similar way, when you're asking them, do you have any sort of mental health conditions during the last 12 months? The follow-up question only makes sense if they answered yes. If they answer no, it doesn't make sense to ask them, oh, does it affect your day-to-day activities, right? And the way we've implemented this, like the way we implement control flow in fast-gov-uk wizards, is using a field called predicates. Now, predicate is a dictionary that allows you to specify the key and a value on how, like, so this is a wizard, and so you kind of like you the user have answered this question, and so you kind of carrying these answers through the pages, right? And so you kind of like imagine it's a form, but you're kind of building the data submitted by the user one step at a time, right? So everything like so once they've answered this question, um, the data that is submitted should say permission and a value, right? So what predicate does is it literally predicates uh, the execution of this step or this question if the user have answered yes to the permission question, right? Like so, if they answered no to the permission question, they wouldn't see this, and you can actually apply this to all the rest of the question because the permission question is like central, right? Like if you say no to permission, you shouldn't see any of the follow-up questions. Like all of them should go away, right? So this one, the next one, every question is predicated upon the condition that the user said yes to permission. This is what this is saying, right? But this question, right, the follow-up question to the mental health question, this is predicated on one more thing, right? So it's also predicated on whether the user said yes to having a mental health condition or illness in the last 12 months. And that is very simple to add, right? So for the question health, if the user answered yes, and for the question permission, if the user answered yes, ask them this question, right? So that's like this is how predicates work, and that kind of implements the control logic of the wizards in a very simple and readable, or I think, readable way, right? So so we've now turned on this feature. Let's run it again and see how it works, right? That's exciting, I think. So now we have the same form, but we've now brought in the control logic, right? So it's the same form, so it should look pretty much the same, but um, it should behave in a different way. Um, so that's the form. So if I've implemented the control logic correctly, if I say no right now, it should not ask me the rest of the question. It should just take me to the end, right? So no takes you to the end, right? So that works. If I say yes though, I would get the second question, right? Like the second question being, what, do you have any health conditions, right? So I say yes, I get the second question. Now, if I say no here, it wouldn't ask me the follow-up question, right? So if I say no, it should take me directly to the two questions. Yep, that it is, and do that. And but if I instead said yes, then it should ask me the follow-up question, like, does it affect you day to day, right? So there it is, right? So we have implemented, so this is now working, right? Like, so this is, and I mean, let's kind of go through this and save it just to, you know, save it. And we do the downs where I can show you the data. So SQL3, open service.db, table. There you go. So that's like, let me take myself out of the way. And this is like the other submissions, right? So um, if when the permission is no, um, the rest of the form is like just not filled. When the permission is yes, you get to fill the rest of the form and your answers are saved. And yeah, it's probably um, yeah, it's probably fun to kind of look a little bit into how the wizard is implemented, right? So if I command click here, it takes me to the wizard class. Now I've been telling you that wizards are forms, right? Like I repeated this like a few times now. So it's interesting to note that it's the wizard is like not inheriting from the form class, and there is a good reason for that, right? It does a lot of formy things, but it's not exactly a form because the reason it's not exactly a form is because individual steps in a wizard are forms, right? You kind of specify it like a form, like question, 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 but the question is a form, right? And so the way it works is you kind of give it a bunch of questions, and the question is like a question object, which is over here. This also does not inherit from a form. In fact, the clever bit here is that the kind of the question object is only an interface, right? So it's not like that. That's not it's not part of the implementation. It's only an interface, and what it does is it kind of um, neatly asks the user for like predicates and the fields in a items in a question, right? And the reason it does it is because the underscore question, the private, like the implementation part of question, is a form. And because it's a form, it needs like form things. But if I kind of like just use this, and then you would have to write like code that goes like you have to specify the name every single question, and the name would be the same for the entire wizard. You'd have to specify backends for each question. You'd have to specify success URLs, and it's just like it didn't read well. And so, and that's why we kind of that's why we implemented an object purely for the interface, and then we kind of do the hard work of in the wizard. These questions are just like dumb questions that like you used to for you to pass in a series of fields and predicates and such, and then we actually build the questions, right? So and like this, right? So and the name remains the same because it's the same um, wizard, and then you do this, then you do that, you hook up the data, like all of the gnarly bits in the code are implemented inside the library to build this underscore question object from the interface question object. And but yeah, otherwise, it kind of once you get to the underscore question bit, now that bit is a form, right? So it works like a form. Um, um, the only other thing I would mention here is that if you look at the underscore question bit, the clever thing it does, it uses something called the question backend, right? So I talked to you about backends, how there are sort of many backends in this framework that come out of the box. There is a special one um, called question backend that works like So, right. So what the question backend does is it assigns it pops the value out of like whatever question you've answered, and it um, additively it appends that value to a particular session um, sort of variable, such that as you go through the wizard, you're not overriding anything, but you're just appending these values to a thing like to keep state. And I implemented it as a backend, and it's almost exclusively at this moment in time used in the wizards and specifically used by the question class. So that as you go through the wizard, like you kind of appending these values to a sort of a data object that at the end of the wizard contains, at the end of the wizard, the data looks exactly the same as if you filled up a form on a single page, right? That's the point. That's the point of a question backend. Um, and once that happens, and the data looks exactly like it would if you filled up a form, you can process it, right? So this process method is very similar to the process method in question, right? Like you process it just like the same. You can have like from there on, yes, wizard look like a form. And you do the same things as you do in forms, which is like a like list of backends, call the process methods, and so on and so forth. Um, the only other thing in Wizard that kind of makes it slightly different to forms, obviously, is this the whole state machine sort of management of the step. So for each sort of question, you need to ask, is this question valid? And if it's valid, only then move to the next question, whatever that might be. And so a lot of this is implemented in functions like next step, which does this. And it also, this is where the sort of the logic of evaluating the predicate stuff. So that like, if you answered no to a permission question, this figures out what is the next question that it can ask you. In the case of permission, none, and so it kind of takes you to the end of the wizard without asking you any more questions. So that's important. Um, yeah. Otherwise, what would I? Another thing that I'd probably show you is like yeah, like like the wizard decorator, right? So it is incredibly similar to the form decorator. What is slightly different is like I told you about this process form method that does the state machine of taking you through a form. There is also a process wizard method that does the same thing, but for a wizard. And so this is where like you would see the step being passed in and stuff like that. And here is where you would see like if the wizard uh, is has a valid step. If the step of a wizard is valid, you kind of move on to the next step, right? So this is where the state machine churns, right, and produces the next step. And the next step is where, as I told you, like it figures out the next step based on the predicate logic that you've specified. Huh. I'm sorry if it's getting a bit dense. Oh dear. I would encourage you, like I'm incredibly bad at this. So I would encourage you to read the code. The code is, I think, fairly readable. And I think it probably, yeah, if you read the code, you probably learn a bit more than me blabbing about the code here. But yeah, I didn't sort of mean to kind of talk um, about the details of how a wizard is implemented. The highlight should be that it is implemented, and the fact that when you decide to write a wizard in fast-gov-uk, the code is almost as declarative as the form code or the page code, right? In which you kind of describe your wizard as a series of questions, and each question you kind of describe like a form, and in the end you say you define a backend, which is what to do once a user has sort of filled all the fields in a wizard. In this case, you're saving it to the database. That's what I want you to take away from this, right? Like it is perfectly, this framework, fast-gov-uk is perfectly capable of um, implementing basic wizards. And when I say basic, not simple wizards like BMI, but also wizards with some kind of control logic. It works, right? So equality survey was a very good example of this. And yeah, that's your introduction to wizards in fast.gov UK. I hope you liked it. Um, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Thank you for your time.